Welcome to Dialogue. Today's topic is part of an extensive series on the modern dating crisis.
It really is a profound area of confusion, one that, it seems to permeate every single level of interaction for people who are just looking for a genuine connection.
Right. The anxiety around it's palpable.
It is, and it forces us to ask a really critical question. Why has something so fundamental, so human as seeking a partnership become so incredibly difficult and, frankly, frustrating for so many?
Exactly. And our mission today really is to move beyond the surface level stuff, the complaints, the arguments, and to unpack the underlying systemic causes of this frustration.
And we should be clear, this isn't about assigning blame to any one group.
Not at all. It's about tracing the massive cultural shifts, mainly over the last 50 years, that have just fundamentally reshaped how we all interact when we're trying to find a relationship.
I think the core thesis we're navigating today is that all this difficulty, it stems directly from a vacuum, a profound vacuum of shared understanding.
A vacuum? That's a great way to put it.
The traditional blueprints, the ones that lasted for centuries on how relationships progress, from how you meet to how you commit, they've been almost completely erased by these huge societal and economic changes.
But the problem is clear, agreed-upon replacements for those blueprints, they just haven't been established yet.
And that void, that structural lack of common social rules, that is the undisputed root of this so-called crisis.
It's the feeling of walking into a really complex social game, but everyone is playing by a different set of rules that they haven't told anyone else.
And nobody knows they're playing a different game until it's too late.
Exactly. So let's unpack this. Let's start with the most fundamental forces at play, the real tectonic plates that have shifted over the last half century. I think we have to begin with the rapid rewriting of gender roles.
Absolutely. That's the bedrock of all of this.
When we talk about these shifts, the absolute foundation for everything that followed has to be the economic independence of women.
Yes, and we need to frame this correctly. It's not just a statistic about income. It is a complete structural overhaul of the reason people enter partnerships in the first place.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what's truly revolutionary about this shift is the profound removal of necessity from the relationship equation. Historically, for millennia, coupling was driven by mutual necessity.
Right. Survival.
It was an efficient economic arrangement for survival, for pooling resources, raising children, social stability. The relationship had to be functional long before it was emotional.
If you just contrast the economic landscape of, say, 1970 with today, the difference is just night and day.
Completely.
In 1970, for many women, marriage was the primary path, sometimes the only path to economic security and a respectable social position. Being self-sufficient outside of that was, well, it was the exception, and it was a really hard one.
And today, that script is completely flipped. Self-sufficiency is the norm, especially for, educated people. Women are leaders in their fields. They have substantial earning power. They can own property, manage their own finances completely independently.
So this isn't just about a paycheck.
No, it's about autonomous self-determination, the ability to build a full life on your own terms.
So if you remove that fundamental pillar of necessity, the need to partner up for survival or financial stability, then the whole basis for forming a relationship has to change. But doesn't that create an inherent instability?
I think you've hit on a critical point. If you no longer need a relationship for your external material stability, then the relationship has to be founded purely on internal factors.
Like what?
Deep emotional compatibility, an alignment of core values, mutual sustained desire. And while that sounds like the ideal, right, the romantic pursuit of true love,
Of course.
in practice, it's a much, much more demanding and fragile criteria. It requires constant emotional labor and an ability to articulate your needs that most people were never taught.
It almost makes relationships less durable, doesn't it? A relationship based on shared external survival that's anchored in something concrete. It's real.
Right.
But a relationship based purely on emotional resonance is tethered to something, well, more ephemeral, to feelings, to subjective satisfaction. If that emotional connection wavers, there's no structural necessity, no shared mortgage in the same way, no defined roles to hold it together.
It raises the bar for emotional performance to an incredible height, and it often makes failure feel easier than repair.
Oh. So your partner is no longer just a co-manager of the household enterprise.
No, they must now provide profound emotional depth, stimulation, validation, all these things. And that heightened expectation is incredibly difficult for anyone to meet consistently.
And as that pillar of necessity shifted for women, it naturally left this massive structural vacuum for men. Which I think brings us directly to the dissolution of those traditional male identity markers.
That's the other side of the same coin. For centuries, a man's social identity, his self-worth, it was tied directly to his role as the primary provider, the protector, and the ultimate decision-maker in the home.
It was a very clear, actionable social script. It gave a tangible sense of purpose.
Absolutely. And as women achieved financial and professional parity, those traditional markers became not just unnecessary, but in many modern contexts, they're actively seen as outdated or even undesirable.
And this is the void we're talking about. If a man's identity is no longer primarily defined by his labor or his provision or that kind of hierarchical authority, where does it come from?
It's a profound sociological crisis. Culture has not successfully engineered a universally accepted, robust definition of modern masculinity that aligns with our new egalitarian values.
And this confusion, it's not a minor thing. It can be paralyzing.
It is paralyzing. Men are now being asked to define their value proposition in a relationship based on things that were, in the old system, peripheral. Things like emotional literacy, sensitivity, shared parenting, deep self-awareness.
Skills that were never incentivized before. In some cases, they were actively discouraged.
Exactly. The old blueprint is shredded, and the instructions for the new one are still being written in, conflicting think pieces online every other day.
And that structural confusion feeds directly into one of the main friction points we see later on. The whole confusion over who leads or who pursues.
Right. If leading just meant providing the financial structure, the answer was simple.
But now, if leading means initiating complex emotional conversations or setting a relationship vision, that demands a skill set that very few people were ever trained for.
And that failure to define these new roles, it filters down immediately into the micro level of daily life, even into how a household is managed.
The expectations for division of labor, even in partnerships that see themselves as totally egalitarian, they've dramatically diverged. It leads to this perpetual friction.
The old expectation was largely unspoken, wasn't it? He manages the external world, she manages the internal home. The division of labor was fixed. It might not have been fair, but it was clear.
But now, if both partners are working 50-hour weeks, the division of domestic labor, from taking out the trash to managing the kids' dentist appointments, it all requires constant, explicit, and often exhausting negotiation.
This is where that concept of the mental load becomes so important.
Yes.
It's not just about who physically does the cleaning. It's about who remembers that the floor needs cleaning, who schedules the cleaner, who buys the supplies, and who researches the non-toxic option because the kids are crawling on it.
All of that invisible labor, the planning, the anticipating, the organizing.
It has often defaulted to women, even when financial equality has been achieved.
And this is precisely where the conflict ignites, because previous generations were never required to be fluent in this kind of negotiation and boundary setting. We are asking people to have essentially high-level emotional intelligence and communication mastery just to organize a Tuesday night dinner.
That's a skill their parents likely never needed in their fixed-role marriage. And the core conflict is often asymmetrical. One person might default to that subconscious older model, maybe assuming the woman will take primary responsibility for the mental load, while the other partner is operating strictly on modern 50-50 egalitarian principles.
And that mismatch in their internal operating systems, it just guarantees immediate friction and resentment.
Even when both people genuinely believe in equality, they're just following two different invisible labor scripts.
So if household roles are splintered, then dating expectations are absolutely shattered. There's no longer a single shared social script for how a relationship should progress from, that first spark of attraction to real commitment.
Which brings us to the final massive shift in this section, the impact of sexual liberation on courtship.
This is a huge one.
It's a crucial element in creating all this ambiguity. The invention of reliable contraception, it effectively decoupled sex from commitment, marriage, and procreation. That one single technological and cultural shift, it redefined the stakes of dating entirely.
That is a huge point. It dramatically lowered the stakes for a casual physical connection. Sex isn't inherently tied to the expectation of a shared future anymore.
It's widely accepted now as, for many, a recreational lower-stakes activity.
But at the same time, it raised the emotional stakes immensely.
How so?
Because it creates the state of perpetual ambiguity. Physical intimacy can happen so easily and so early in a connection now, and it completely confuses the trajectory of that connection.
So If two people connect physically and they do it frequently, the relationship feels like a serious one.
Exactly. Even if there's been zero discussion or even an explicit denial of any kind of commitment, the actions and the words are completely out of sync.
The definition is constantly in flux. Is this casual? Is it short-term validation? Is this a serious long-term progression? Are we exclusive? The answer is never clear.
And this constant guesswork about the other person's intentions, it just fuels this profound anxiety in everyday dating interactions.
It creates a situation where vulnerability is deeply, deeply risky. You risk becoming emotionally invested in something that, for the other person, might have been strictly transactional or just short-term entertainment.
And because there's no universal social cue, no defined script that tells you which version of the connection you're in, you have to constantly be performing this risk assessment.
So these combined shifts, economic, identity-based, and sexual, they've effectively dismantled all the historical guideposts. They've created the perfect environment for deep confusion in even the most basic interactions.
So if those macro shifts created the vacuum, that vacuum then manifests as these little micro friction points in every date, every text message, every conversation about the future.
And the first, and perhaps the most paralyzing of these confusion points, is over the basic choreography. Who leads and who pursues?
Right. The old script, the one that mandated male initiation, the man asks, he plans, he calls, he defines the pace. That's now largely obsolete. Most people would see it as incompatible with egalitarian ideals.
The problem is that nothing clear has replaced it. We are in a state of, I would say, institutionalized chaos when it comes to pursuit.
And chaos leads directly to paralysis.
It does. Many people hesitate to move forward because they are terrified of being misinterpreted. If a person, and it's often still the man, pursues strongly, they risk being seen as aggressive, maybe dominating, or disrespecting that egalitarian dynamic.
But if both parties wait for what some people call mutual slow burn momentum, the relationship just stalls out and dies.
This is where we see so many relationships just dying by inertia. Think about a basic step, like initiating the second date, or even just escalating from texting to actually meeting.
In the past, there was a kind of steady, defined ascent.
Right. But now just asking, "I'd really like to see you again," can feel like this act of immense vulnerability because you are defining a forward trajectory that the other person may not be on at all.
And the risk isn't just rejection, it's being judged. Judged as too much or too eager.
Or need.
Or needy, exactly. If you lead by asking for clarity or commitment, you might alienate someone who views that mutual gradual momentum as the only acceptable modern approach. So does leading even mean initiating anymore? Or does it mean something far more complex?
Like ensuring clear communication and setting a vision for the future together.
Right. But there is absolutely no cultural consensus on that definition. None.
And this failure to define who takes the emotional risk of moving things forward. It means that so many budding connections just fade away, not from a lack of interest, but because neither party is willing to put their neck out and risk being the one who cares more.
This paralysis then translates immediately to the most granular interactions. It creates the financial maze of who pays.
This seems so trivial on the surface, but it's a micro issue that absolutely symbolizes these deep macro tensions around gender, money, and power.
It's like a real-time ideological test on the first date.
It is. If a woman is highly educated and economically successful, does her accepting the man paying for dinner somehow negate her independence? Is she signaling that she expects to be taken care of? This is a moment where those conflicting scripts just collide dramatically.
I think that's a critical observation. The gesture of paying can be interpreted so radically differently depending on the script the person across from you is using.
For some, the expectation of being paid for signals traditional respect and a willingness to invest. For others, insisting on splitting the check signals equality and mutual partnership.
I read a study that noted something like 65% of young couples now wrestle with this silent 5-second anxiety period when the check arrives.
That agonizing wait.
Yeah, that wait where both people are internally debating whether to grab their wallet or gesture to the man or insist on splitting. The fact that that number is so high, it just illustrates the enormity of the tension around a simple transaction.
That anxiety is generated purely because we lack a standardized social rule. Paying for a date can signify investment, but to another person, it can signify ownership.
If he pays, is he buying her time? If she pays, is she signaling that she doesn't need his provision and therefore maybe doesn't need him at all?
And without clear communication, every dollar spent or offered is constantly being interpreted as some kind of statement on gender roles.
So if we expand this confusion from the first date to the whole trajectory of the connection, we arrive at the difficulty of defining commitment in a culture that is just saturated with options.
Commitment itself has been transformed. It used to be a natural, expected progression. Now it's a high-stakes, stressful decision.
We're living in a culture of nearly endless options, aren't we? It's largely facilitated by dating apps and these vast social networks.
And when you have this perceived infinity of choices, committing to one specific person can feel like a high-risk gamble. It feels like you might be missing out on a superior opportunity or the perfect
The
match.
paradox of choice.
Exactly. This fear of opportunity cost, it slows down the whole process of defining a relationship. It traps connections in this perpetual gray area, a never-ending talking or hanging out phase that never progresses to a clear, declared relationship status.
And this fear of commitment, it feeds that initiation gap we talked about, even in basic communication. We see this bizarre scenario where, after a great date, both people are interested, but they both wait for the other one to text first.
Why? Because texting first feels like showing more interest, which in this ambiguous environment can be perceived as losing leverage or being overly eager.
It's an absurd social mechanism. Simple actions are paralyzed by this role uncertainty.
Yeah.
The fear of being the one who cares more, the one who takes that first emotional risk, is so powerful that it prevents the most basic connection from progressing.
And if both parties retreat to protect their emotional leverage, the relationship dies.
Ultimately, all of this confusion, it boils down to the highest level, almost existential question facing modern partnerships. What do masculinity and femininity even mean now? And how should men and women complement each other?
If gender roles are no longer defined by labor or provision, if financial contribution is symmetrical, then those roles must be defined by deeper internal qualities or characteristics.
We're forcing a societal shift from, you could say, transactional roles to emotional essence and psychological contribution.
But this creates a profound conflict in our internal values. A person might intellectually and publicly say they want a partner who embodies modern, progressive values, emotionally fluent, highly sensitive, career-focused.
Yet, deep down, they might still be subconsciously seeking the comfort and stability aligned with older archetypes. The stoic, decisive protector, the primary risk taker.
And they might not even realize they hold these contradictory desires at the same time. They want the modern emotional intimacy, but they crave the structural stability of the traditional archetype.
And that internal contradiction makes it almost impossible to articulate what they actually want. It leads to partners being discarded when they fail to embody both of these contradictory ideals at once.
And the very concept of complementing has changed entirely. It's no longer about filling a missing functional role. You provide the money, I provide the home management.
Right. Now, complementarity is about filling emotional or intellectual needs.
Which requires an unprecedented level of self-knowledge.
Babe.
You have to be able to articulate not just what you want in a partner, but what your own psychological weaknesses and emotional needs are, and how a partner's internal qualities can enhance your life.
So, for example, a highly analytical, quiet person might seek a partner who provides the social spark and emotional spontaneity that they lack.
Right, that shift from a functional, concrete complementarity to a psychological, abstract one dramatically increases the complexity of finding a compatible match.
It elevates the standard from can we run a household together to can we enhance each other's inner lives?
It's a massive, necessary step, but it's one that causes immense friction because it requires these deep communication skills that, frankly, previous generations simply did not need.
So this overwhelming ambiguity and these heightened emotional standards, they lead us to the inevitable outcome. A crisis of mutual misunderstanding and profound frustration on all sides.
The conflict we observe, it's rarely rooted in malice. It is fundamentally an operational difference caused by these mismatched scripts.
It's like two people playing a board game. One thinks they're playing chess, a traditional structured game with clear rules, and the other believes they're playing an open-ended role-playing game, a modern, negotiated dynamic.
And they don't realize the other script even exists until one of them makes a move, a request for commitment, a suggestion to split a bill, that the other side sees as this inexplicable violation of the rules.
The result is a cycle where both sides feel like they're putting in immense effort, only to be judged or rejected or ignored based on a set of rules they never agreed to or even knew about.
This lack of clarity, it creates a deep sense of victimization and this profound misunderstanding.
And this shared frustration, It vents itself in very specific gendered complaints that have become, ubiquitous online and in casual conversation. On one side, we hear the perpetual refrain, "Where are all the good men?"
And we should delve deep into that complaint, because it's not just a casual throwaway line. The frustration often stems from seeking partners who have successfully navigated that massive identity crisis we discussed. Women are looking for men who have done the internal work to integrate their value proposition into a modern context.
They're seeking partners who are somehow simultaneously emotionally available, meaning they can articulate their feelings and engage in deep vulnerability.
And yet still possess that traditional sense of confident forward momentum, the ability to plan, to initiate, to commit.
In short, they're seeking a partner who has built a robust, egalitarian identity structure in the complete absence of the old, reliable scaffolding.
It's the search for a partner who can manage the ambiguity. And the scarcity is real, because that skill set, emotional bravery, modern egalitarian values, and a willingness to commit is incredibly high.
So when the dating pool is fractured by so many conflicting expectations, those integrated partners, they do seem genuinely scarce. And that leads to the painful conclusion that all the good ones are gone.
And on the flip side, the complaint is equally intense and equally rooted in this structural confusion. Where are all the good women?
Right.
This frustration often centers on the experience of receiving wildly diverse and sometimes contradictory expectations.
The experience is often that of performing for an audience with shifting tastes. If men try to be the sensitive, emotionally fluent partner, they might risk being labeled as passive, indecisive, or lacking that desired spark.
But if they lean into the traditional archetypes, being stoic, decisive, prioritizing career success, they risk being called emotionally closed off or,
Patriarchal.
they feel trapped in a no-win scenario. They're trying to hit an invisible, moving target. And that navigation of shifting social approval, it creates immense performance anxiety. Should I pursue aggressively or wait for mutual initiation? Should I pay or insist on splitting? The lack of clear feedback leads many to simply withdraw from the high-stakes game altogether.
Concluding that modern women's expectations are just impossible to meet.
It's the constant feeling of being judged harshly based on contradictory rules. And this results in the shared toxic verdict that culminates all this frustration. Everyone is damaged, everyone feels frustrated, and everyone feels broken.
That statement that everyone is broken or damaged, it acts as a profoundly powerful self-protective projection, doesn't it?
It does. When you have these repeated failures, not because of individual failings, but because the systemic rules of interaction are broken, it is so much easier psychologically to conclude that the people are fundamentally flawed than to conclude that the system or the rules are impossible to navigate.
The reality is that acknowledging the structural problem is complex. It requires collective societal effort and years of adaptation. Blaming the individual allows for a simple, immediate explanation. I'm fine, they're the problem.
And this pervasive feeling of mutual damage then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in the dating pool.
How so?
It lowers the bar for acceptable behavior. It justifies disengagement. Why should I invest deep emotional time and risk vulnerability in someone if they are inevitably damaged anyway?
It fuels this profound cynicism.
Exactly. It ensures that even potentially successful connections are approached with skepticism and an iron shield, making genuine, deep connections even less likely. The diagnosis of damage actually prevents the cure, which is communication.
So when the cultural landscape is hostile, when expectations are entirely unclear, and when the emotional risk of frustration and rejection is so high, people naturally adopt these sophisticated defense mechanisms to shield their inner self.
And in this vacuum of social norms, we see a widespread retreat into specific behaviors.
These retreats are really textbook self-protective strategies against the high emotional risk of the modern dating environment.
They include all the mechanisms we hear about constantly: cynicism, shallow connections, the roster approach, casual arrangements, secrecy, and profound emotional detachment.
They're all systems designed to manage and minimize vulnerability.
Yes. Let's break those down. Cynicism is the preemptive emotional shutdown. It is judging all potential partners as inherently flawed or incapable of meeting your needs before the interaction even begins.
The goal is to manage your expectations so effectively that if the date fails, you're proven right. It reinforces your internal narrative of safety.
Then you have the shallow connections and casual arrangements. This is prioritizing immediate low-stakes gratification, physical intimacy, social validation, temporary companionship over deep emotional investment. These relationships are deliberately kept lightweight and easily disposable.
They're an escape valve for neediness without the cost of commitment.
And then the rise of the roster, the strategy of keeping multiple connections active simultaneously. That is pure risk mitigation. It's almost modeled, maybe unintentionally, after investment strategies.
Right. If one point of emotional reliance fails, you have an immediate backup or distraction. It prevents over-reliance on any single person.
And we should define the roster clearly. It's the purposeful, concurrent maintenance of multiple casual connections, often with differing levels of intimacy, to ensure emotional needs are distributed.
It's effective at preventing the acute pain of rejection.
But it's inherently corrosive to achieving the depth required for long-term satisfaction. The scarcity of high-quality connections is managed by increasing the quantity of low-quality, low-stakes connections.
And finally, we see secrecy and emotional detachment as key coping mechanisms. This is the active withholding of genuine feelings, of vulnerability, of your history, or your future intentions.
The primary goal there is to maintain absolute control over the interaction and minimize any surface area for pain. If you never admit you want commitment, you can't be rejected for wanting it. If you never show deep feeling, you can't be hurt when the other person inevitably retreats into their own defense mechanism.
And all these defense strategies exist because, fundamentally, in this ambiguous new landscape, vulnerability feels prohibitively risky.
And this is the ultimate tragic paradox of the modern dating crisis.
That vulnerability, the act of sharing genuine needs, admitting you want commitment, expressing your true self, is the single thing required for a deep, meaningful, durable bond.
But in the current environment, vulnerability exposes you directly to all those conflicting expectations we've been outlining. If you are honest and you state, "I want a committed, serious, exclusive relationship within 3 months," you run the risk of alienating someone who is operating on a casual script.
Or who just interprets your desire as needy or too much because it violates that unwritten cultural script of slow burn, non-committal engagement.
The modern dating environment severely punishes this kind of emotional honesty. Admitting you desire commitment in a culture that prizes endless optionality can label you as intense or maybe even weak.
This high cost of being vulnerable forces people to retreat into detachment and emotional armor. They believe it's safer.
And the result is a destructive, self-perpetuating cycle. People retreat into detachment, which guarantees that the connection will remain shallow and unfulfilling.
And this failure of depth, it reinforces their initial cynical belief that deep, fulfilling connections are impossible.
And it confirms that feeling that everyone is damaged. They've created the very lack of connection they were trying to avoid. The solution they sought, safety guaranteed the outcome they feared. Loneliness.
So the way out of this structural confusion is not to try and reconstruct the outdated roles of the past. I mean, that ship has sailed.
It has. What the current environment demands is the mastery of an entirely new set of relationship skills, far beyond anything required in previous generations.
What are those skills?
These skills are necessary because the rules are now negotiated, not inherited. First and foremost, you need radical, clear articulation of your specific needs, your values, and your trajectory, not just generic statements of desire.
And secondly, you need a non-judgmental acceptance that the person across from you is likely operating on a completely different, unstated social script. And you need the communication skills to surface that difference early.
And finally, you need the courage to initiate commitment despite the ambiguity and despite the pervasive cultural pressure to remain detached.
It demands that both people show a degree of emotional maturity, self-awareness, and relational courage that previous generations who just followed the script they were handed never had to develop.
The confusion we feel, it's the growing pain of an evolving society. It's demanding better people and more honest communication to form lasting bonds.
Okay, let's bring this deep dive to a close. We have, I think, thoroughly examined the systemic causes of dating frustration. The rapid attainment of economic independence, the vacuum created by lost identity markers, the splintering of social scripts, and all the subsequent confusion over fundamental rules like leading, pursuing, and committing.
The crucial takeaway here, I believe, is that the confusion and the profound frustration you might be experiencing in your own search for connection,
Right.
they are not indicative of personal failures. They aren't necessarily a sign that everyone is damaged.
Right. They are direct, logical consequences of massive, rapid societal change that outpaced our ability to collectively define new relationship norms. You're navigating a fundamentally new landscape without a commonly shared map.
And understanding that your struggles are structural, that they stem from this vacuum of shared understanding, that is the first, most empowering step towards successfully navigating this environment.
It allows you to stop blaming yourself, or individual partners, and to focus instead on mastering those new skills. Radical self-articulation, clear communication, and the courage to define your own path.
The real challenge is to discard the expectation of an infallible social script and to bravely start writing your own negotiated contract for connection together.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.